right, we're on the home stretch. Wow, what an amazing panel that was. Thank you for those of you who are just joining us now, and thank you for those of you who have been with us through the whole Micro Summit today. So the last session, we have a very, very special guest who I'm very excited to introduce to you all. We just heard from some panelists, some entrepreneurs who are on their journey, right? They're in the early stages, but they're on their way. They've raised that capital and they're kicking things off. But one thing that a lot of very early stage entrepreneurs have to ask themselves is, how do I even get to that point? How do I raise capital? Who do I talk to? How do I get in front of a VC? How do I start talking about things like valuations? That's why I'm so excited to introduce you today to Zane Lackey. Zane is one of us. He is a practitioner. He is a CISO. He is now a general partner with Andreessen Horowitz, which is the biggest VC by assets under management. This is the VC. This is the guy Caleb and I both want to get in front of. This is the guy we all aspire to get in front of. So Zane, welcome. Thank you. Please join me. We are psyched to have you here.
Thank you. Excited to be here. I didn't realize I was getting entrance music.
Of course you are. You're Zane Lackey.
Oh, wow.
Look, we're going to do a Q&A, you guys, and this is a Q&A for you. We want the Q to come from you. Please prepare your questions. Please stand up. This is an amazing opportunity to ask questions of Zane. With that said, I'm happy to get things kicked off.
Good.
Zane, would you please share a little bit about your story and your journey and how you ultimately landed at Andreessen Horowitz?
Happy to, yeah. Let's see. My background's been I've been very lucky that it's been all over the cybersecurity industry. I think my first DEF CON was 2000 or 99, and my first Black Hat was 2005. And I started out in security consulting and pen testing at ISEC Partners way back when, which was super fun.
I probably competed at one
point.
Yeah,
exactly. We all won with that, it turned out. It turns out security consulting, you needed a lot of it back then. And went from there. I got given a really interesting opportunity to go be the first CISO at Etsy in the early days of Etsy, and what turned out to really become the early days of DevOps and CI/CD and kind of modern software development. I left ISEC on a Friday wrapping up a gig at a healthcare company where they deployed every 18 months. And I left there and I started at Etsy on a Monday, and they sat me down and said, we deploy to production 30 times a day. Figure out security, go. And it was a very hard juxtaposition from that, for sure. Ended up having, as you might imagine, a ton of lessons learned, which is a very polite way of saying we screwed things up constantly, and then eventually figured out kind of what sort of worked in that environment. And one of those things—
Did you invent failing fast?
Well, we certainly
invented— You are the grandfather of DevSecOps.
We invented a lot of failing, that was for sure at the time. So if you tried to use Etsy in 2011 and checkout didn't work randomly in the middle of the day, yeah, sorry. We did that plenty of times. But we ended up learning so much, as you would imagine, from there. And one of the things that we learned was really around how we needed a much more modern way of protecting our web apps and our APIs. It now seems like a joke of oh yeah, DevOps and faster development and DevSecOps and all these things are going to happen. I mean, at the time, I was getting booed off stage talking about this in 2011 by a bunch of banks saying oh, we'd never do that. That's just for startups. We would never do these sort of things. Yeah, and so we took a pretty big gamble and we left Etsy, my two co-founders and I, and we started Signal Sciences. And that was really about a much more modern way of protecting web apps and APIs. As you would imagine, there was a ton of lessons learned along the way there as well. We built that for 7 years. We grew it to 30 million in ARR, and we had 150 employees at the time of exit when we were acquired. And along the way, I really learned, for relevant to today, I really learned how much I really like helping other founders. And so I started out, along the way, started advising and then started angel investing, really tiny amounts, but just the little checks that I could afford at the time on a founder salary, and kind of building those relationships up and really seeing where I could help. And so that ended up leading to doing more and more and more angel investing, which is what ended up leading to a16z. So I've been there a little over a year now, really focused on, my kind of view of the world is the convergence between dev tools, platform engineering, and DevOps and security. That these spaces that were all complete silos are really coming more and more and more together.
So at what point on that journey did you realize there was an entrepreneur in you?
Probably the day we started. I don't know. It wasn't. I think for some folks, it's always like a lifelong dream. For me personally, I was never opposed, but it wasn't something that I was like constantly trying to do. For me, it was so much the team. Like my co-founders and I, we loved working together. We had all worked together at Etsy. And the opportunity kind of fell in our lap to start a company. And we decided, what's the worst that could happen? Let's give it a shot.
So what do you mean by that? What was the opportunity?
So we had all these, so the actual story is kind of funny and dumb. The actual story was, we were speaking, myself and one of my co-founders were speaking at a conference it wasn't OWASP, but it was like an AppSec conference in Austin. And one of my co-founders had already left Etsy. Another one was leaving Etsy. I had no intention of leaving Etsy at that time. But we were always kind of talking about, if we started a company, what would it look like? And we were chatting with a friend after we gave our talks. And we were like, yeah, one of these days, like, we'd love to start a company together. Because he was like, oh, don't you guys miss working together? And we're like, yeah, we really, really want to work together. And but we have no idea what to do. And he's like, yeah, you guys just gave a talk. And then afterwards, there were like a dozen people standing around asking if they could buy what you were talking about. And you told them all no. Like, maybe you want to just think about that. Maybe just build the thing they were asking for. And we're like, oh, wow, that's actually a good point. And so that began the road to Signal Sciences.
Amazing, amazing. Well, let's turn our attention back to there's probably some budding entrepreneurs out here who are thinking, okay, what is the first thing I should do if I want to execute on this journey? Mm-hmm. Let's start with that question.
I think the number one thing to really think about, and this is like from the highest level, is whether it's you or co-founders or you solo, like think about what you want the outcome to actually be. Like think about 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what do you want the world to look like? And for some folks, if you're very, and the secret is actually be honest with yourself and extremely honest with your co-founders there. Because what you don't want is a mismatch down the line. Like I'll give you an example. For some folks, they're very passionate about like the technology they're building, and they don't really care if there's customers or not. They care about people who are using it, but they don't really care about like building the company or the customer set or anything like that. And that's fantastic. Like you've seen a bunch of amazing technologies come out of that, but then there can be a wild mismatch if like that sort of personality type goes and raises a ton of venture capital, and now there's like a complete mismatch. The same is true in reverse. Like what you really don't want there is, you think you're aligned with your co-founders or with your investors, and then it turns out, actually, you would be very excited about an early acquisition offer in like the first year or second year, and like maybe your co-founder really wanted to go IPO or something like that. And so making sure those visions on the future are actually aligned. I mean, it sounds straightforward. This sounds like the dumbest advice, but I cannot tell you how many times I have had this conversation with a founder where they are living through one of the most painful experiences of their life because they had a complete mismatch there, where like they thought that they both wanted to IPO, and now they got a $20 million acqui-hire offer, and their founder is like, I am taking this deal, and they have a complete mismatch and knockdown, drag-out fight.
Well, and things can change too, right? That founder might very well be exhausted.
100%. Right. This is why this is not it's not just a point-in-time conversation, right? This is a conversation you have over and over and over.
Having that conversation
100%.
As you go along the journey.
Yep.
All right, so let's say, you've got a couple of founders, they're on the same page, we want to aim for an IPO, we both want to go after VC to get off the ground. Then what? How does that entrepreneur get in front of a VC, and even more so, somebody like you?
Sure. Well, yeah, lower your expectations for me. That's easy. No, look, the main thing to think about is it's just like all of the outbounding you'll have to do for customers. It's just like kind of all of these other things that you'll see in terms of recruiting great candidates and the rest. I would start with the beginning, which is a warm intro from a mutual friend goes a very long way. And in terms of like actual techniques for getting in front of investors or hires that you want to make or anything there, finding ways where you're not just doing cold outreach. If you're doing cold outreach, then the next step would be, okay, find a way to really, really personalize it. I mean, everybody in this room gets a million spam messages on LinkedIn, but I bet most of us in this room have gotten something on LinkedIn before where you're like, oh, huh, weird. Yeah, actually, I'll reply to that. Like, they had clearly done their homework. It was not like some bot that wrote it. Like, it was someone who really took the time to write something very personalized to you and ideally very relevant to you. And that skill set, I mean, I think in terms of reaching investors, the nice bit is that skill set that you have to develop there, it applies to all parts of your business that you're going to have to do, from hiring great candidates, landing, getting the first meeting with important customers, all of these sort of things.
You have to become a very diverse, multi-talented leader, don't you? I mean, it took me a while to figure out that it's not the world. Everything is not just about my customer. It's also about my other stakeholders, especially my investors, right? And so you end up, serving multiple masters. You're serving your investors. You're serving your customers, most importantly, in my opinion. You're serving your employees, also most importantly. You're serving the industry. You're serving industry analysts. How do you position yourself in Gartner's world, for example? And hopefully you'll land on a strategy that will work in all of these different environments. So it is a very challenging
Spot on.
ahead, for sure. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. We hear crazy stories sometimes about startups, right? We hear about startups with no revenues, but they receive these massive valuations. Is that for real? And if it is for real, how does that happen?
As someone who is now, a little over a year into VC, I heard a lot of those same stories and saw a lot of that.
Give us an insider's view on how that plays out, because we're all really curious.
Boy, I wish I had a great answer for you there. Look, I think like any other market, you have crazy things happen in it sometimes. I mean, I think that we've all seen, I've seen exactly that from the outside too, and I was I think in a lot of ways fortunate to go into the VC world after that. It was a really crazy time to start in 2022, and cool, I just joined an industry that just collapsed. That's interesting. Amazing timing. But no, look, I think that look, there's a lot of macroeconomic answers. There's a lot of industry answers and everything like that. I'm not a macroeconomist. I'm not a spokesperson for the VC industry. I still feel honestly, I still feel myself as a founder who happens to be in VC rather than a VC who happened to be a founder.
So what sort of a model do you typically see for something like a valuation?
A
sensible one.
A sensible one. And this is actually the key bit that I wanted to talk about on that is, as a founder, it's your choice. Right? You can optimize for price, you can optimize for the people you're going to work with, you can optimize for the firm, you can optimize for all of these different things. Throughout our own company building journey, at different points, we optimized for different things, and we learned different lessons out of each of those. So in terms of valuation, look, a lot of times what you saw with that was there was crazy competition for a deal, right? There was crazy demand, and so it pushed up prices. And that's just how the world works in really any economy. In this case, what I would say is actually important, and what I would say is I hope a good takeaway for everybody in this room is you have to think one move ahead on this sort of stuff. It's very easy to fall into the trap of all of these VCs are chasing, if you have this amazing moment where all these VCs are chasing you.
Does that happen?
It does happen. Yeah, totally.
Because we just heard from a bunch of entrepreneurs who wanted 24 rejections,
Oh, yeah.
That's the reality that many of us are
That was much more my story, by the way, I got laughed out of a lot of rooms, for sure. But it does happen where you get chased a ton. And you see, more often than not what happens with that, the prices go higher and higher and higher and higher. And what I would really encourage people to think about is it's very easy to fall into that trap of I just raised at this astronomical number, therefore I've been successful at that.
Right.
And that's not, fundraising isn't success. It's one small part of the journey here. And so what I was saying a second ago of thinking ahead, you have to think ahead. That's almost certainly not your last round, even though we all want to believe that, it will be as founders. But it's almost certainly not your last round. And are you positioning yourself for success on the next one? Are you screwing over employees because now their stock options are valued extremely highly? Are you not putting things right for your previous investors? There are a lot of factors that actually go into this here. And I think that it's actually much trickier than people appreciate at the time when you're just I got all these investors into a bidding war and I got the highest price. And you're okay, that's very good for today. What's your world going to look like tomorrow? Because you have years and years and years ahead of you. And so not falling into that trap, it can actually save you so much pain. I cannot tell you how many phone calls I've had with founder friends in the last year that are now dealing with this.
Yeah. The investment community is a bit like the cybersecurity community in that it's very, very hard to understand from the outside, right? There's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of acronyms, a lot of kind of secrets. Some people prefer it that way, it's just, trust us because we know, and so I found that really challenging. And I talked to people and I read what I could and I tried to educate myself to the best of my ability. Maybe there was a better way to educate what would you recommend for entrepreneurs who recognize they need to understand this stuff? I've got to protect my team. I've got to plan forward. I've got to make sure I think it was John said, don't paint myself into a corner in the way that I structure things. But I'm a cybersecurity expert, right? Like I'm not, this is not my world. So, and maybe you can or you cannot trust the advice or the guidance that you're getting from, the VC you're so close to closing with. I mean, they're sitting on the other side of the table. You're in a negotiation here. So they're probably not the guys that you're going to turn to for advice on how should I best structure this.
Totally.
So what do you do? Who do you go to?
The number one piece of advice I would give there is reach out to other founders. I think you'll be deeply surprised at even cold outreach to other founders, even where you don't have any mutual connections, the amount of founders that will take that call. And it blew our minds. It really, I think, set me on the path here that ended up leading into VC and everything, which was in the earliest days of 6i, we reached out to a bunch of founder friends that we had connections with, and then a bunch of founder friends that we didn't, or just founders that we sent them a message on LinkedIn. And these were like founders of really successful companies that had zero business talking to us. And they would get on the phone within like a day. It was insane. Like the amount of help that founders will give other founders will blow your mind. And I think the best thing to kind of compare it to is think if you just went into your first CISO job and you emailed other CISOs and were like, hey, I'd love to just chat and compare notes. Like if a brand new CISO emailed you and said that, like I bet almost everyone in this room would get on that call. I know I would when I was a CISO. It's like I am super happy to help other CISOs, help other security practitioners, like whatever we can all do to help each other, the better we all are off. It's different if it's a vendor emailing me, for sure. But for other practitioners, like I am absolutely here to help out. And so in the founder journey, it's the same exact thing. I think you will find so much resonating with other founders that are really willing and not only willing, but excited to help out with other founders there, especially not only around fundraising, around scaling your company, around closing your first customers, around all of these different pieces. It's something that we always found to be incredibly valuable and something advice I've always given to early days founders where, hey, just pick a few that you've always admired and reach out to them, and I bet you'll be surprised as to how many respond.
Good advice. All right, guys, we need your input. This is your opportunity here.
This is an audience Q&A and heckling spectacular.
I'm going to raise an unrelated topic just while you're thinking about what your question is going to be. This is the first time we've put on this Entrepreneur Micro Summit, and there's numerous lessons learned that Caleb and I have been discussing during the day. One challenge we have is a challenge in our industry which is related to diversity. It was very hard for us to put together a fairly diverse set of speakers today. And one of the other very successful entrepreneurs in our community who I've been fortunate to get fairly close to in recent times is Galina Antonov. She's the co-founder of Clarity. She's right here in the audience today. Galina, you must have a question for Zane. Why don't you come on up here and help represent diversity, at least from the other side of the mic today? Here she comes. Yay. Thank you, Galina. All right, guys. Bring it on.
Cool, but I'll get you started. So as a founder, right, you've done the pitch, hundreds of times. Give us like your top 3 recommendations of how best to prepare for getting in front of someone like yourself, sure. Right? Maybe do's and don'ts of like the successful pitches that you've had. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. I think kind of the biggest things that you think about there are, what is at the earliest stage, right? We're talking about like a seed check or like a pre-seed round, like the very first funding round. You're really ultimately only looking at 2 things. You're looking at the founder's background and like why are they suited to this, and then the market and kind of the broader market that they're going after, because odds are there's going to be some sort of pivot inside there as they actually find product market fit. And so in terms of prep, I'd say it's kind of actually a through line between both of those, which is know the space that you're going into. Like being an expert in the space that you're going after, and then ideally pairing yourself with another person or others that are experts on the other sides of building a company. So maybe you know the technology side, the classic one would be there's a CTO who knows the technology side super deeply and a CEO who knows the market very deeply, and that sort of combination. But knowing that space that you're going into is like by far the biggest thing when you're first trying to get a company off the ground. I mean, the reverse is, hey, I've played around with a tool in this brand new space for a week and I'm going to go start a company there. It's like, okay, that's tricky. And then as you get further and further down the line, it becomes more and more traction focused. I'd say at the next stage, at like a Series A stage, it's definitely traction focused, but traction is still actually a little bit loosely defined because for certain dev tools companies, it might be users and interactions and things like that. For others, it might be revenue is the classic one. As you get further and further stage, it gets focused more and more on kind of the go-to-market metrics, the revenue, margins, things like that. But early on, know your space and know it very deeply. And if you are, you're very deep on a few of the skill sets, but not the others, ideally you're part of a co-founding team that rounds that out.
Do you ever lean into rounding out the co-founding team? Do you ever get kind of half of the picture comes to you and I'm the engineer and I know this space and I know how to build this thing, but you can see that the CEO is missing? Do you ever sort of help that entrepreneur get over that final hurdle?
Oh yeah, yeah. We definitely try to help matchmake there, for sure.
Yeah, go meet these people and come back later once you figure out whether you are aligned.
The ones that are the most fun to do that with are the ones who show up saying like, "Hey, I know I'm the CTO. Do you know any folks that are the CEO?" What I certainly never try to do is someone who thinks they are like a solo founder and they've got all the skill sets covered, but you see that's not, you're not trying to push somebody on them. Like it just doesn't work. If somebody shows up and is like, look, I could really use a partner who can do X, Y, and Z, great, like let's find somebody there.
But if they turn up and you can see that they need help, but they haven't recognized that in themselves,
it's hard. That's harder.
That's a hard conversation to have.
It's harder, for sure.
I could appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, next question.
Please.
Two-part question.
All right.
First is, as a co-founder who is not getting paid and so on, there's always pressure to get money as early as possible. But what would your recommendation is, how far along the journey you'd like to see in terms of the product before they come to you? That's one question. And the second question is, when we are choosing a VC, if you are lucky to choose and so on, what type of qualities should we look for, especially for the early stage entrepreneurs?
Yeah. Good questions. They both can be like 10-minute answers, so I apologize. I'm going to do the short version. Look, in terms of that early sort of stage of you started building product, you've got a few different options of when to raise there. I would say the classic answer there is when you start finding product market fit. You get a few pilot customers, they're able to be referenceable and say really good things about the product and working with you. I'd say that's kind of that's the historically classic time to go raise a seed round. Sometimes that's earlier, sometimes whatever, but I'd say kind of ballpark classic there. You've built something that you can demo, you've got some people that are willing to become pilot customers, and then you kind of go raise off of that sort of traction. The second was in terms of what you should be looking for in a VC. It's the most frustrating answer ever because it depends, but it's really like this is somebody you're going to spend a lot of time with over the next many, many years if things go right and also if things go wrong. So make sure it's somebody that you actually enjoy spending time with and that you feel really adds to the business there. I mean, I would say if you're lucky enough to choose, that's the thing to go for, especially if this is somebody joining your board or something like that. I mean, you're going to be working with them until the end of the company, whenever that is.
So is that a relationship with the individual at the VC, or is it a relationship with the VC?
This is absolutely. It's why it's a 10-minute answer for sure.
Yeah.
Because it can be tricky, right? Like you can also run into circumstances where you loved somebody at a firm and they leave, but the VC firm is still on your cap table.
Right.
So they've got the board seat there, and you've seen all sorts of crazy edge cases like that can lead to sometimes totally fine situations and sometimes really messy situations. The ideal case is the then of both, right? That you like the firm and you like the partner. Yeah. You don't always end up with that. Right. Sometimes it's one or the other. ideally it's both,
right,
for sure.
right.
But it's absolutely, to your point, it's something to think about, for sure.
Great insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
So my question comes actually from a conversation I had last night, where I asked somebody who's been in the startup industry for a handful of years, what would constitute success for an unproven founder moving into the market right now? The answer I got was, if you are an unproven founder at this point, not a good time to enter the market. Economic circumstances are going to be causing venture capital to be more restrictive in the way that they're issuing venture, and that as a result, innovation is going to swing back towards large companies. One, I'd like to know if you think that that's true.
Yeah.
And two, even if it's not, in the face of that difficult message, how would you, as a founder and a leader, bring a small new team up through that adversarial position?
Yeah. Great question. Very timely question. So I definitely disagree there. Like, I think this is a great time to build a company. And it's not only because I'm biased, and being at a VC firm, like, founder hat back on here even, I think it's a great time to build a company. And the reason that I think that it is that if you can build a company right now, like, you are going to build a very enduring company. Like, is it harder to raise capital today than it was in 2020? Yeah, duh, absolutely. But I think you're going to build a better company as a result, and you're going to build an efficient, company that can actually grow sustainably, versus being, over-rotating on one metric that you really kind of just focus on just because capital is free. So this is one side of your question, and I'll come back to the other side. To the thing of, is now a good time to start a company or just a good time to be an incumbent? I think it's a fantastic time to start a company. I am extremely optimistic on the future right now of starting companies. The other side of your question was then on, as an unproven founder, as a first-time founder, right? And I would also throw out the term unproven here. Like, you've been proven in the things that you've done. You're a first-time founder. That's fine. But you're proven in what you've done. It kind of goes back to my earlier one there, too, of deeply knowing your space and really being focused on that. Like, why are you the team to go after this space is the question I think pretty much any investor will be asking themselves during a meeting. Right? This is a first-time founder going after SpaceX. Why do they know, not SpaceX the company, Space Y. Going after Space Y, why are they such a fit to do that? And so I think really putting forward your story as to how you've been a practitioner in that space, or how you've done all this research on it, and these are the people that you've talked to, how do you really know and have a deep expertise for this space? That's the story I would really try to package up. But yeah, to the first point, I am very optimistic about the companies that are getting built today.
Do you think that the founders who are getting underway today will develop a reputation for having done it in the worst of times, and therefore this is the creme de la crop because they did it in such a challenging time?
Ask someone who built a company in 2008 how they felt about 2020, right? Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely that, right? And I think not only...
Was that recognized and remembered when others have looked at your career? Like, wow, you did that then?
No, I think we were later. We were definitely that. But I think I know a lot of founders who started during that time, and yeah, it was crazy.
You remember that when you think about them. You're like, they did that in a very difficult time.
Not only that, but I think that the values you instill in the company and the culture that you build, like, that's what's going to build such a sustainable company.
Right.
Like, it really, from the ground up, builds this sort of culture that I think allows the company to endure. Yeah.
Sanity and responsibility.
Yep. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Andrew. I'm a student at Pace University, and I got a student scholarship to come to Black Hat, so it's great to be here. Yeah.
Awesome.
And one of my first talks I went to was by Perry Carpenter, and he's the chief evangelist for KnowBe4. And I'm trying to do a startup that deals with cybersecurity awareness training. I make film quality short films that have a narrative to show ransomware. One of my films is The Ransomware Nightmare. And he has this really interesting slide where there was a bar chart, and he talks about IT product investments and what the IT security products where the most money is invested in. It's like network products, endpoint products, web products, and the lowest on the chart was the human. He calls it the human, which is training the average company employee. The least amount of money spent there, right?
Yep.
So I have a couple questions. One is, how do you feel like that famous idea of you don't put money or shoot where everyone is, you go where everyone's going to be? and maybe how there's this opportunity for that human element, and no one's done it right, no one's figured it out. And Mr. Carpenter actually produced something called The Inside Man, which is like a Netflix kind of long episodic series. And my thing is short films, and I act, direct, make graphics. I do wear all the hats, and they come out pretty good, actually. I took an art of film class, and I apply all that. The other question was, I am a startup, and I don't really need much of a budget. I can get a 4K camera that would look Hollywood. Mm-hmm. They make really good cameras on a budget. And I act, I do all the things, I wear all the hats. So I don't need a huge budget. I don't need venture capital necessarily right now. But my vision to be a big film production company that can do many things in the long term could use the benefit of venture capital. Mm-hmm. So I haven't made any sales yet, and coming to this conference is allowing me to network, and I'm making really great connections. And I just want to, I guess, ask you maybe for the chance to share my vision, but also to hear what you think about the human element of awareness training and shooting for where you're talking about this era we're living in, the difficulty of startups, but maybe there's this opportunity for that, and how you view that market.
Yeah, so I'd say to the first question, which I'd really kind of say back as, do you try to create a new market, or do you go into a legacy market? Right, like to your point of the quote of like, skate where the puck is going, right? I think that is a very foundational question when you're starting out a company is, especially in security, do I want to go build a security product that is for a net new market, or do I want to build a security product that's for an existing market that maybe I feel isn't being done right, or something like that? They both have pros and they both have cons. I don't think there's a prescriptive answer between either. I think some have, well, I'll run through them real quick, actually. So for the net new market, the problem is almost always creating budget. You can usually get people to try out the technology because they're messing with some new tech, and they're like, oh, let me find the security piece of that and try it out. But there's no existing budget line item, so when you go to ask them to pay for it, they're like, oh, well, the boss says that we can't spend on something new here. So that's challenging. Those can end up taking a lot longer time, but they can be, if the technology trend really goes that way, you can be building for something really big. The reverse is building something new in a legacy space. That has its own challenges. The positive one, the positive case is that there's already budget established. That's fantastic. Like you can go, ideally, steal that budget from some legacy vendor. The con is you're actually going into a space where people have a ton of perception about what that space already is. I mean, this was my own company when we were building that. We built a modern version of WAF, which is like the most hated product category in security, and like, you could not pay me to go into that category again for that style of one. But at least there was a budget line item there that we could go take. And so you kind of decide like which one makes sense to you. Do you try to bring something new to a legacy space, or do you go for riding some new technology wave? Neither's right, neither's wrong. You have to kind of align it to your vision there. So just because we're coming up on time, I was going to stick to that one.
All right.
Why don't we? I think you've been.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Didn't see you over there.
How you doing? So I'm coming from the perspective of 1099 subcontracting. Mm-hmm. And my question would be, I mean, you mentioned warm handoffs being obviously the best way. Outside of that, going with the cold marketing strategy for customer acquisition, how would you, or what roles would you, try to personalize your marketing towards, besides obviously the CEO, but are there other roles that you would suggest going after to personalize your strategies towards them?
When you're doing outreach to prospects, like
Yes.
prospective customers? So I think the thing is you start to break it down inside a prospect as to who's the champion, who's the buyer, who's got to be approving and testing the technology out, and then you customize it for each one of those sort of roles.
Who's the end user?
Who's the end user, exactly, right? And oftentimes you identify sort of a champion who gets you in, but isn't the person who's going to sign the PO and the deal, but they're going to get you in, they're going to bring you to the developers who are going to use it, or the security engineer is going to use it. It's going to then bubble up to the CISO there for signature. That's one path. Another path that's very common in security is you start at the top and you work your way down. It's a CISO-driven sale. Those have their own challenges for sure, but you figure out that the shortest version I can do in like 1 minute here, I would say, is don't just view it as kind of one message to an organization. There's probably 3 or 4 different archetypes inside there, and you're going to customize to each one. And then for whatever your product is and your space is, you're going to learn, oh, this is the one that usually gets me in the door. This is the type that gets me in the door. Let me really try to scale that one, and then here's the message that they bring to their peers to get us actually a POC or something like that. But don't just view it as one kind of flat organization. View it as there's many different types, and you need to figure out what's the message to each type.
Thank you.
Cool.
We've got time for one more question.
Hey, Zane. Thanks for being here. So, quick question. So, I see some founders that are working with incubators, and I see others that are working with early-stage VCs, and they're raising funds pre-product. What do you think makes the most sense in this economy?
I would actually say it should be, if you're a founder and you're evaluating which one you want to do, I'd have it be less driven by the economy. I mean, maybe you're kind of forced into that, but I would say if you have the luxury of choice, I would really make that decision through the lens of what skill set from either one of those organizations is going to add the most to building your company at the stage that you're at. So some incubators might bring a skill set there that you're like, hey, look, I've got this great idea, but I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z. Like, they're going to help with that. Some early stage investors, are helpful on these other things. Okay, maybe I'm really good at this, but I'm not good at that. Let me actually work with an early stage investor here. Maybe it's a completely different type of investor and it's a group of angels, whatever. But I would think about it less through the economic lens there and more through the what rounds you out and is more likely to make you successful to the next round. Because the reality is, like, if you're doing well, your next round's going to be easy regardless of whatever choice. If you're not doing well, the next round's going to be hard regardless of whichever choice you did. And so, like, really think about complementing your skill set there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And right on, we are out of time, just like that. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Zane, for sharing your story and answering questions. Thank you for your questions. And until next time.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much.